Hi chess friends, today we are going to witness Karthikeyan's queen sacrifice. Firouzja plays with white, Karthikeyan is black. White starts with d4, Karthikeyan plays knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, king's Indian defense, e4, d6, h3, Makagonov system, castle on the king side, bishop e3, c5. There is no free pawn here. If d pawn takes c5 pawn, then queen a5 followed by d pawn takes c5 pawn. Knight f3 by white. Queen a5 pins the knight to king. Knight d2. C pawn takes d4 pawn. Knight b3 threatens the queen. Queen takes knight check. Karthikeyan sacrifices the queen without any immediate advantage. B pawn takes queen. D pawn takes bishop. Karthikeyan has knight and bishop as compensation for his queen. Taking the e pawn will lose some more pawns. If f pawn takes e3 pawn, knight takes e4 pawn and the c3 pawn will also fall. Best move is to defend the e4 pawn, and there is no way to defend the e3 pawn by black, so it can be captured later. f3. Bishop d3 is also fine for white. Knight h5 threatens bishop takes c3 pawn, which will fork the king and rook. Queen c1 avoids the fork and threatens the e3 pawn. Bishop h6 defends the e3 pawn. g4 threatens the knight. Knight f4. Black invites the white to capture the e3 pawn by queen, so that knight g2 will win the queen. King d1. Best move is queen c2. After king d1, white loses the castle rights. Black has the chance to win the queen back by knight d3. Bishop takes knight is forced. Otherwise, if queen a3, knight f2 check forks king and rook. e2 check. King takes e2 pawn. Bishop takes queen. Rook from h5 takes the bishop. Material is even. White's only disadvantage is that it has a doubled pawn on c file. Back to the position. Knight e6. King c2. Knight c6. h4. Preparing g5, which will reduce the bishop's scope and cuts the bishops defending the e3 pawn. Bishop f4 continues to defend the e3 pawn. Queen d1. Knight e5. Knight c1. Bishop d7 develops the bishop and connects the rooks. a4 preventing loss of queen by bishop a4 check. Rook a c8 goes after the c4 pawn. Knight e2. It's not possible to defend the c4 pawn, so white wants to remove the defender of e3 pawn. It's best to play the g5 first, followed by knight e2, which will force the exchange of bishop for knight. Bishop h6 by Karthikeyan. Now bishop can go to g7 square to control the a1 h8 long diagonal. g5. Bishop g7. Bishop h3 preventing knight c5. If white tries to defend the f3 pawn by bishop g2, then knight c5. Let's see the continuation. a5. Knight takes c4 pawn. Queen b1. Bishop a4 check. Rook takes bishop. Knight takes rook. Now two knights dominates the board and the white king is exposed. Black has the advantage. Back to the position. So white played bishop h3, pinning the knight to bishop. Knight takes f3 pawn. Queen d3. Knight e5. Queen takes e3 pawn. This dangerous passed pawn got captured after 14 moves. Knight takes c4 pawn. Queen f2. Inaccuracy by white. Best move is queen d3. Queen d3 is good because it defends both the pawns on e4 and c3. Queen f2 is not good because f file is going to be opened soon. Rook c5. Rook hb1 goes after the b pawn. Bishop c6 defends it and threatens the e4 pawn. Bishop g2 defends it. f5. G pawn takes f6 pawn in passant. Bishop takes f6 pawn. Rook f1. Inaccuracy by white. Best move is queen g3, which will avoid the discovery attack by rook. Bishop takes c3 pawn. Fine move by Karthikeyan. Opens a discovery attack on the queen. Bishop threatens the rook. And another discovery check is coming soon from rook. White played queen takes rook. Only way to stop losing the queen or rook. Knight takes queen. White gives the queen for rook and bishop. Rook takes rook, check. King takes rook. King takes bishop. Even though white has a rook for knight, black has 3 extra pawns and all the pawns are connected. All the white's pawns are isolated. Black has 2 tempi advantage. Knight e5. a5 moves away from the danger. Knight takes e4 pawn, check. Bishop takes knight. Bishop takes bishop. Now the black's game plan is to exchange bishop or knight for knight and then move the e and d pawns forward. Knight d4. Bishop d5. Knight b5 threatens a7 pawn. a6 counterattacks the knight. Knight c7. Bishop c6. Rook f1 check. King g7. Knight e6 check. King h6. Rook f8. King h5. Rook h8. h6. Rook h7. King takes h4 pawn. Black creates another passed pawn on the g file. Rook takes h6 check. The following moves don't need any explanation. King g4, knight d4, king g5, rook h2, bishop d5, rook e2, king f4, rook f2 check, knight f3, rook e2, e5, knight c2, bishop e4, knight e3, d5, king b4, knight d4, rook e1, king f3, and white resigns. Black is preparing king f2, which will fork rook and knight. There is no way to defend both the rook and knight, so white resigned on move 52. If you like the video, share, subscribe and like. Thank you. Post your suggested games in the comment section.